Hello, Kuma29 here with another Topic of the Week video, and this week we'll be talking about Kung Fu Panda. This week's topic was submitted by Andrew89, and she asked, the villains of the Kung Fu Panda movies, each are all different yet each all work. What makes them all enjoyable villains, and why do each work so well in your eyes in terms of story, character, and their interactions with other characters? Tai Lung with Po and Shifu, Shen with the Soothsayer and Po, Kai with Po and Oogway. Most importantly is the character interactions. What aspects of these interactions work so well? Now, first I'm going to start off with Tai Lung, given that, well, he's the villain of the first movie. The most important relationship and interactions for Tai Lung come in between Shifu and him. Tai Lung is very like a traditional kind of villain. He's basically the main character, but everything you would expect the main character to be. Po, he's a panda, he's fat. He didn't have a lot of traditional martial arts training, but then you compare him to Shifu, who's big, strong, athletic, very, very skilled, very highly trained. And the fact that he's so highly trained, the guy, after 20 years in prison, managed to break out through sheer finesse of using his tail to move a feather to unlock his cage, to unlock the trap that they had him in. And that was really the point of it, is that he was meant to be, he felt like he was supposed to be the Dragon Warrior. So, he took it by force. His interactions with Shifu are very telling of how Shifu interacts with everyone. And when you look at Shifu in the first movie, he's very bitter. He's he's a cruel person. He's selfish. He's just in general, he's pretty much 100% a dick. And you see that the reason that he became so, mean is because he raised Tai Lung as his own son. And you can see that even in the flashbacks of when Tai Lung tried to take the Dragon Scroll to become the Dragon Warrior, how Shifu couldn't, when he had to fight him, he couldn't help but see him as the little, the cub that he raised. And it really puts in perspective why he's so bitter and why he's just so mean to Po. And we actually see that there's a parallel between Tigress and Tai Lung. We actually see that in comparison to how when Shifu was raising Tigress compared to how he raised Shifu. When Shifu does something, that's outstanding or impressive, like managing to hit as a child to hit the practice dummy all the way across into the wall, and Shifu's just like, yeah, good job. And then when Tigress does the same thing, all he does is correct her stance. And it's like, and it really, the whole thing between Shifu and Tai Lung, that pretty much builds up the way honestly pretty much the core of the movie in terms of character interactions, because you have the way Shifu trained the five, you have the way he raised Tigress, which you can actually see why she's such a stern and serious character who doesn't generally mess around, is because she was raised with the iron fist of Shifu, who wasn't getting himself attached, and he didn't want to get attached after what happened with Tai Lung, and it's really heartbreaking, and it's so good to see that in Kung Fu Panda 2 and 3 that Shifu actually did get over that, and it's actually really great to see his character progression, even just from 1 to 2, because even in the opening of 2, he's so much better than he was in 1. Now, what makes his interactions with Po, it is actually really funny, because when Tai Lung first hears about Po, And it's actually kind of funny because there's this build up. He knows that the Dragon Warrior has been chosen, and he's like, okay, I'm going to challenge this Dragon Warrior. I'm going to take his title. And then when he finds out that the Dragon Warrior's name is Po, he's just ecstatic, like, Po, that's the Dragon Warrior's name. And he's like really building this whole fight is building up in his head, like, I am going to fight this Dragon Warrior and take this from him. I will be the Dragon Warrior. And then when he gets to him, he's just like, you're a panda. He's like, no, this isn't right. This can't happen. And it's so funny because this is going to repeat for every single movie. Is that when the villains meet Po, there's just this moment of, really? Well, it's not so much with Shen and Kai, but there's still this moment of disbelief. It's mostly with Tai Lung. Since Tai Lung is, well, I would say he's the most arrogant, but really Shen is probably the most arrogant of all of them. Followed by Kai, but Tai Lung, in terms of just, general mortality, Kai is immortal, so he's been gaining power, but when you have, but Tai Lung was still just incredibly arrogant. So his interactions with Po are hilarious, considering that Po isn't, like, super humble. He's someone who does in a lot of ways understand his limitations, and through his training with Shifu, he actually did learn that he can do kung fu while still being a panda. So, and it's interesting to see how much Tai Lung underestimates Po, because Tai Lung is very much strength. And when he basically fights an opponent that he, one, can't paralyze, and two, can barely hit, and when he hits him, Po just bounces back, quite literally. So, and it's funny when you look at that and you see how that arrogance just, it wasn't that his arrogance so much wasn't his downfall, but it was really not giving up. And it's actually really great to see that Po was completely willing to just say, hey, you know what, we can just call this off, like, we don't need to fight. But then he refused to stop, and he wasn't going to stop until he could be the Dragon Warrior. And ultimately finding out that the Dragon Scroll didn't really have anything special in it. And then, which pissed him the hell off, that all these years he wanted the Dragon Scroll, only to find out it was just a simple life lesson. And that's really one of the most interesting things about Tai Lung, is that he's built up this idea in his head. And it's funny because the audience also builds up this idea in their head that, oh, it's the Dragon Scroll, it's going to grant immense power. And then, no, it doesn't grant you immense power. It's all about, seeing yourself as better than what you had seen. And Tai Lung just couldn't comprehend that. It's something that Po got, because Po has been able to see that he can still be himself while, becoming the Dragon Warrior. And his interactions in the end with Po, even though that's a very short part of the movie, it's still good and it's still great. And it's also kind of funny when you see him interact in those short times with the Furious Five, and how, one guy takes on five of the best martial artists in the entire region. That's how strong he is. And it's funny because, the movie does very purposefully have a fight between Tigress and Tai Lung, given their character parallels. And especially, there's this one, the one line, one of my favorite lines from Tai Lung is when he paralyzes the five and he's like, Shifu didn't teach you everything. It's like, oh, because, that's the danger. is that Shifu doesn't teach them everything, because if he did, and someone turned out like Tai Lung, and they know all these secrets, oh crap. And he's not going to teach it because he's become such a shut-in. He's not going to open up. It's not emotionally and not in terms of martial arts, because of what happened with Tai Lung. What makes Tai Lung an enjoyable villain is, like what I said, he's basically the stereotypical, what you would imagine as the dragon warrior. His build, his mannerisms, in fact, the species of animal he is, he's got that ferocity you would expect. And it's actually really interesting because he is in every way the opposite of Po, in terms of, his personality, his body shape, his ethics, because he's very much a highly trained warrior, and then Po is just a fat panda. So it's actually very interesting to see him, Po, go up against a guy who, in every, you put this in any sort of hypothetical situation and Tai Lung would win, but he doesn't. And that's what and he represents so much and parallels a lot, not just Tigress, but also parallels Po. Excuse me. Wanting to claim the title of Dragon Warrior. And that's really all I have to say about Tai Lung. He's actually the simplest character the simplest villain of the trilogy. So there really isn't, once you talk about his whole relationship with Shifu and him being the father, and I also forgot to mention when he talked about when he's beating the crap out of Shifu at the end of the movie. He talks about how all he wanted to do was make Shifu proud. That Shifu had fed all these ideas of him being great, him being the Dragon Warrior, into his head, and and Shifu even recognizes that, yeah, I shouldn't have done that. That was kind of a bad idea. Giving this guy all these aspirations, only to basically have him be shunned, and then he basically was like, no, I'm going to take it whether you want me to or not. And you can see this violence in him that Shifu was probably blind to seeing, because, he viewed him as a son. So he was so blind by his love for Tai Lung that he didn't treat him the way he should have. That he was too caring, honestly. And he didn't think as much. Yeah, but that is the core of Tai Lung's character, is his relationship with Shifu. Less so with Oogway, because Oogway I think he saw him as just a crotchety old man or something. I don't remember the exact words he used. But yeah, nothing real much there. So yeah, that's pretty much it for Tai Lung. Now moving on to Shen, the villain of Kung Fu Panda 2. Shen is very interesting. This is when we start getting actual mythos in the series, and we actually start finding out why Po is the only panda we see. We find out that there was a freaking genocide of the pandas, because the Soothsayer warned that Shen would be defeated by the warrior of black and white pandas. So he went and slaughtered them all. Makes me think of that part of DBZ Abridged when Trunks tells Goku that Yamcha ended up killing himself in the future, and he's just like, dark. What makes Shen interesting is, Shen actually brings in the what is a very traditional theme of basically technology versus tradition. And this is something you see in a lot of stuff. And it's actually something that I remember in, was it The Last Samurai? I don't remember which movie it was, but I remember all these samurais getting gunned down by a minigun, because they were basically making their last stand, and then a bunch of guys with swords couldn't go up against a minigun, or at least a prototype of a minigun. It was one of those crank guns, and it's a very traditional theme, and it's interesting the way they do it, and it's very interesting in an artistic way how they handle the canons. But that's not what this is about. This is about Shen. The Soothsayer is a core character in Kung Fu Panda 2, and she exists to basically play off of Shen, really. Her backstory is tied to Shen heavily, considering that she was consulted by the royal family, and that Shen basically took everything she said. His entire life was shaped by what she said. And it's funny because when you really look at what Shen did, it's the problem of creating your own issues, and it was a self-fulfilling prophecy is what it was. Because it's like watching an episode of That's So Raven. You know, Raven sees something that happens, and she does everything she can to stop it, only to cause what she saw happen, and sometimes it didn't even happen in any way she thought. When Shen was told that he would be defeated by a warrior of black and white, he was just like, panda. Guess I'm just gonna go kill all the pandas. And when he does that, and it's funny in the movie when he finds out that his destiny his fortune is still unchanged, and he's so desperate for this control because he realizes that he has no real control over his destiny. And in the end, that destiny proved right. He was defeated by a warrior of black and white. That Shen, our Po, beat him. But it was only because he went and attacked the Panda Village. If he hadn't done anything, he wouldn't have been defeated. He probably would have... He would have been accepted by the throne. He would have taken over, and he would have lived a long, happy life. And it's something that's so tragic about his character, is that when he interacts with Po, it's this... It's a similar thing with Tai Lung, is that he's just like, you're the panda that's going to defeat me. You're my destined arch nemesis. Like, really? And he thinks he's got everything, made until Po discovers inner peace and basically just destroys his entire fleet. And I really love the interaction. I said this with Tai Lung, but when he's fighting Shen, and he's just like, come on, Shen, you lost. You destroyed your fleets, destroyed your cannon. Let's give up. And Shen would not. I think one of the biggest things with Shen is that Shen obviously just doesn't want to die. He doesn't want to die, and it's a very understandable motivation. But he went about it in the worst way possible. He went and committed genocide. He just started slaughtering pandas left and right just because he was afraid that one of them was going to kill him. And it's so awful because you can see at the end, right before he dies, right before the big pillar collapses and kills him, you can see this moment where he just kind of accepts his death. Like, after all this fighting, he's so clearly lost, even fighting way beyond what's reasonable, and he's just like, well, this is it. And it's so awful because if at any time Shen's decided to stop, and so I'm just tired, let's just go home, Po would have been like, okay, cool, bro, I'll go make some soup and rice and stuff, and we can go eat. Like, he'd be totally down for that. And that's really the sad part about this, is that Shen just could not understand. When he interacts with Po, it's this, I have to kill you because if I don't, you're going to defeat me. And that becomes so twisted and warped that it becomes its own... He becomes a villain because he's so driven by this fact, and his exile certainly didn't help. I mean, he was exiled after killing a bunch of people, which he didn't understand why people were so upset. He's just stopping this horrible destiny from happening, and you could tell his character was unhinged long before his exile, but because who reacts like that? Oh, it looks like he'll be defeated by a panda. Well, I'm gonna commit genocide. Really, like... But you can actually see that his utter exasperation with Po, like, he just cannot handle the fact that this goofball is his arch nemesis. This is the one who his destiny is all about. And it's kind of funny, honestly. And I mean, of course, this is comedy. It's an action comedy movie, but... Excuse me. It is kind of funny to... to see that. Going back to the Soothsayer, though, what makes his interactions with the Soothsayer so interesting is that the Soothsayer never once changes her mind on things. She is very much set, and what she says is right. And she tries to reason with Shen, basically saying that the stuff he's done, he's only caused more harm with the crap he's doing, and he refuses to change, and the world refused to change. But yeah, he refused to change because that's, he can't handle the fact that he can't control his own destiny. Ironically, he could. And that's really what's sad. He thinks that his control is slipping. Which, actually, now that I think about it, he was a real big control freak. Especially when it comes to placing the cannon in a very specific spot. He's just like, a little to the left. No, a little bit more. No, a little to the right. Because he's such a control freak, and it starts with his destiny. Ironically, the one thing he felt he had no control over is the one thing he had complete control over. If he had decided to just not do anything, he would have been fine, like I said before. But he created his own problem. He turned Po into his arch nemesis because of the atrocities he committed. And it's so funny when you look at the characters. You look at the concept of destiny, and that Po was the dragon warrior, and he could have at any point just like straight up given up. In fact, it would have been the best. It would have been the easiest solution. If he gave up, the second Shifu basically told him to. Basically made it obvious that he doesn't want him there. He could have just gone back to the noodle shop. No harm, no foul. But that wasn't his destiny. And he chose. And he chose to fulfill his destiny rather than ignore it. He chose to train. And he chose to do everything he could to become the Dragon Warrior. Even if he really didn't feel he deserved it. Because the guy didn't really know what he was doing in the first place anyway. But as you can see through Kung Fu Pandas 2 and 3, that he does completely fulfill that legacy, that prophecy, and that title of Dragon Warrior. He completely accomplishes it, all through his own methods. And that's something that's interesting, looking at, comparing him to Shen. Because Shen, where Po decided to fulfill his destiny in the positive way, Shen decided to fulfill his destiny by trying to ignore it. It's kind of funny, though. They did the opposite things. One ran towards his destiny, one ran away from him, but both accomplished their destinies. The Soothsayer really kind of establishes the core of that little plot line involving Shen and Po, especially since she's the one who nurses Po back to health after he was blasted and ended up going into the remains of the Penguin Village. It is getting late. The remains of the Panda Village. But really, and it's funny because he basically gets fed up with her eventually because he can't handle the fact that he's been wrong this whole time. So he's just like, get out. What makes Shen really work as a villain, apart from being voiced by Gary Oldman, is that, he's a peacock. And peacocks are generally seen as sort of like prissy. I mean, with big feathers and stuff. No one really thinks of peacock as someone who's tough. But Shen is incredibly deadly. He can kill people left and right. And it makes him scarier. Like, he's just... You'd underestimate him just by looking at him, and it's... Excuse me. And it's kind of shocking just how deadly he can be with his knives. And then that's not even counting the fact that... Excuse me. The guy went all Middle Earth and decided to have this huge, like, forge building all these, cannons that he was going to use as an invasion tool. That is terrifying too, and the whole idea that he's killed I think, was it just the Rhino guy? Yeah, I think it was just him, but he killed a master by just blasting him to bits. And I really like the idea of the tradition versus, technology. And, is there really a place for tradition, or when that boils down to, in this movie, Kung Fu, or any kind of martial arts in general, compared to this powerful technology. And ultimately, Kung Fu reigns supreme when Po discovers inner peace. An inner peace that Shen refused to have simply because he was so obsessive over his destiny that he could never have any internal peace. He was always in conflict and always basically crazed because he refused to just do something that wasn't completely evil. And what really is interesting with him is that he basically brings in a lot of the lore for involving the pandas. And we get more in Kung Fu Panda 3, and I'll get to that in a bit. We get the full backstory on Po and how he ended up with, gosh dang it, what was the goose's name? I forgot what his dad's name was. But you can find out how he ended up in the care of the goose. And it's a nice story. And it's just... And it's so interesting looking at Kung Fu Panda 1. Because Kung Fu Panda 1 really is improved by Kung Fu Pandas 2 and 3. Because you get that backstory involving the pandas, and you have so much more, like, feelings for Po than you did before, because he's not just the panda, he's the last of his kind. Well, until we find out there's more, but... Yeah, that really... Shen is very important in terms of the overall story and over the trilogy of movies. Mainly, he's incredibly important to Po, very personally. And that's one of the things that really helps Po attain his inner peace, because he sees that, what happens with, Shen, and he's basically coming to terms with what happened to his people. And yeah, like, Shen is just super important in terms of that. Yeah, I think that's it for Shen. Now to move on to Kai from Kung Fu Panda 3. Kai is the most powerful of the villains, being the fact that this guy's been absorbing the chi of Kung Fu masters in the spirit world, or spirit realm. I don't remember exactly the terminology they used in the movie. Darn, I guess I'm just going to have to rewatch Kung Fu Panda 3 again. Now, Kai's interactions are actually more with Oogway. And we find out that Kai was Oogway's basically best friend, who became corrupted by the power that he had attained, with the power of the pandas, the whole thing about, using chi. And, you giving chi to heal. He discovered that you can take chi to make yourself more powerful. And ultimately Oogway had to had to stop him, which led to this real big schism that was the schism between the two. And he has this bitterness that one, he's completely forgotten when he comes back to the mortal realm. Like no one knows who he is except Po. And that is one of the funniest things, because in a reversal of what's happened in the last two movies, when Kai first meets Po, his first reaction is, "Thank you! Someone who knows who I am. Thank you." He's literally sitting there like, "Thank you." And then Po's just like, "Let's get the chit-chat. Chit-chat-chat-chat." And then Kai's just like, "What's going on?" And Kai, his interactions with Po aren't really as deep as like the ones with Shen and Po, considering that Shen holds a lot more personal significance for Po. But he is interesting to see how basically how you can see how greed gets you, and then what, his friendship can get you. Because he was going to be basically turned into, a little jade, little pendant, little representation of himself, and be completely enslaved by Kai. But he had the power of his friends his family, and all the other pandas that really that came through and gave him and stopped him from being absorbed. That gave him incredible amounts of chi. And that's really the difference between Po and Kai. That's the interesting thing of their interactions. The one thing that each villain has in common is that they're baffled by Po. Not just when they meet him, but in the way he basically gets what they want. Because one, he's worked for it. Two, he actually sets out to attain these goals, and sometimes accidentally, but he's never doing it for selfish reasons. And that's the core of Poe's difference with his villains, is that when he attains these goals that they had wanted, that they're baffled that he can attain this without basically being completely evil. Tai Lung is absolutely baffled by the fact that he's the dragon warrior, and that he basically understands what the dragon scroll is, talking about. And he's just totally okay with it. Shen is absolutely baffled that Po can even can have any inner peace when he just found out the truth about the pandas. And then, especially since Shen himself could never attain that inner peace because he's so obsessed with the destiny. And then Kai is baffled that he can have so much chi and so much power without, stealing it from a bunch of people, because it was willingly given to him. And that's something that just makes these villains so interesting, all of them. Kai is, I want to say he's simple, but because his actual backstory is pretty simple. It's your traditional old friend who turned to the dark side story, which has been done a bajillion times. But set with these characters that we really like, it's actually still interesting to see. Especially when you see, Oogway, because this is actually the Kung Fu Panda 3 is the first time we actually get anything significant on Oogway. He's just one of those mystery characters who's just kind of been there, and he's just been like, hey, without really any explanation. Now, when we find out about it, we learn more about the pandas as well. And that, the whole thing learning Chi and Hia, but you learn about the whole thing about how he was corrupted by that, and how Oogway had to do the tough thing and stop him because, he was, even though he was his best friend and his battle buddy, he's still doing something that was wrong. And it's actually interesting to see Oogway in that position like 500 years ago, that he actually had a lot of crap happen. Kai really works, and especially as a finale villain for the end of a trilogy, because he's immensely powerful. And not in a way that makes you feel like it's, cheap. It's not like they just pulled something out of their butts like, yeah, someone's more powerful because spirit powers or something like that. He actually has been dead. And he's in the spirit realm world, collecting power, enough power to become mortal again. Or not so much mortal, but just return to the mortal realm. And he actually is kind of terrifying, while also being the funniest villain. Of course, he's voiced by J.K. Simmons. He's very funny, but he's also very terrifying, especially with the fact that this guy could decimate masters. He was a master himself, probably one of the oldest masters at this point, because and on top of the fact that he's stolen the chi of all the other masters around him, he's just incredibly powerful and incredibly terrifying villain to think of, our characters going up against. So when Po goes up against him, it's actually something that feels like a lot is on the line. And one of the things I really like, though, is that they tied in the whole thing of the wushu finger hold and actually made it make sense with the whole thing of, you're just basically zapping someone to the spirit realm. Oh, okay, that makes sense. But, yeah. These interactions that these villains have with the characters is still interesting, and it's one of the things that make them work. It's a classic saying that a movie is only as good as its villain. And with the villains of the Kung Fu Panda movies, they're all good. And especially it gives Po a good challenge to go up against, with Tai Lung being a physical challenge, Shen being an emotional challenge, and, Kai being a spiritual challenge. And it's actually interesting seeing him go up against this and come out victorious and as a better and more complete person by the end of it. And that's the Kung Fu Panda movies are all great. All three of them are fantastic. And the villains are all great. I think that's it for today. If you want to watch last week's topic video, you can check that out here. If you want to watch next week's topic video, I'll post that here when I actually get around to making that. If you have a topic you want to submit, you can go to my Tumblr and send me an ask and put topic, then whatever you want me to talk about. Or you can go just comment on YouTube. If you're on YouTube, just comment below of what topic you want me to talk about. Just make sure that it's something fictional. It's about a fictional story, or it's, about something like that. I have rules, which I'll post below. It can even be something about, like, a video game, maybe gameplay and stuff. And if you don't really know if I know anything about it or have any right to talk on it, you can just ask me if I know anything, and I'll tell you yes or no. So, yeah, that's about it for today, and thank you for watching.